SC Media and our sponsor, Sophos, are proud to present this month's CISO Stories program. This is the show where CISOs share tales from the trenches and unpack leadership lessons learned along the way. Find this month's CISO Stories content at CISOstoriespodcast.com. The Cyber Risk Collaborative is a unique membership community enabling cybersecurity leaders to work together in a trusted environment. To learn more, please visit CISOstoriespodcast.com/CRC. Greetings, everyone. Welcome back for another month's episode of CISO Stories Podcast. You got myself, Jess Hoffman, back with you as your host. Very excited. We have Mandy Andress with us today. What's up, Mandy? How you doing?
I'm doing great. Glad to be here, Jess.
Yes, thank you for joining us all the way from Austin, Texas. Hopefully, is it hot out there yet, or are you still in the season?
It's getting there.
We
have a few days of 90 degrees, but it does still get a little bit cool.
Yes. Well, I would really like 90 degrees right now, just for a second, though, because sweating isn't, exactly sexy or anything, but, it's good for the pores. Thanks for joining us. This month's topic is cyber liability insurance. And, you've been in a CISO role for quite some time. Pretty impressive background. You have a law degree, too, which is really cool. You might be my new best friend. I always wanted to grow up and be a lawyer. So that's pretty cool that you have that background, too. You're speaking at a lot of events. Big advocate for diversity, equity, inclusion, which is awesome. Today we're going to talk a little bit about cyber liability insurance, risk mitigation mechanisms, your experiences there. Cyber liability insurance obviously is a requirement for organizations, definitely government these days. So it's a hot topic and can be controversial. Obviously, budgets and resources are always a big deal here. Let's talk a little bit about that. But first, give an intro. Tell us about yourself.
Yeah, thanks. I am currently the CISO at Elastic, the search AI company, for those not familiar. And I've been the CISO there for 7 years. Before that, spent 13 years in financial services. As you mentioned, I received a law degree, also have an accounting degree and a CPA, and just really come at security from that combination of business, tech, and law, and have done that from the very beginning. And my whole career has been in information security, cybersecurity, whether it's consulting, in-house, at different companies across different industries. And I just really enjoy the constant challenge and learning that the security world brings to you.
Awesome. And I'm sure when you started your career, cyber liability insurance wasn't even a thing, right?
Did not even exist.
Didn't even exist. I see you were at Mass Mutual. Probably wasn't even on the radar when you were there, huh? Awesome.
Not when I started.
Not when you started.
About halfway through was when cyber insurance became something to talk about and get.
Okay, cool. Well, how about with your role now as a CISO at Elastic? What are some of the challenges and conversations you're having about the implementation and usage of cyber liability insurance?
Yeah, it's first and foremost, it's looking at cyber insurance as just one aspect of a risk mitigation program. When you look at risks, you can mitigate them, take action to either lessen the risk or remove it. You can transfer the risk, which is where cyber insurance comes into play. Or you can accept the risk and be comfortable with where you're at and know something may happen, but you're good with whatever that outcome would be. And it's making sure, one, that you're looking at cyber insurance in that bigger picture context, because depending on what types of risks you're looking at and evaluating, you may make different decisions based on where your company is at a given point in time, or as time evolves. You may have an existing insurance policy, but decide to make some changes based on business changes or threat changes that are happening in the world around you.
So is that something that you've encountered, like having to pivot from the type of insurance coverage that you've had based on, the organization's business model or threat landscape?
I certainly saw changes when I changed companies. When I left Mass Mutual and went to Elastic, two very different organizations, two very different industries, two very different threat profiles. So cyber insurance coverage needed to focus on slightly different things. The core is still the same, just event response. What are the impacts? The types of events and the types of threats are the thing that always evolves regardless of industry, just based on what is happening in the broader threat landscape. And also over time, just cyber insurance is still pretty new, and getting more information, more analysis, more understanding on what are the true costs of cyber insurance. So looking at it on the insurance provider side, really having a better understanding of what are the payouts, what are the models, and getting much better on how they're pricing and premium. We've certainly seen over time a dramatic increase in premiums. We've seen premiums drop back down a little bit to more semi-reasonable levels. And all of that is largely driven by both events that are happening, but also the learnings for cyber insurance companies and the policies that they're offering and what they're covering, what they're carving out. So I'd say that's also one thing on a cyber insurance policy, is just to be very clear and have a detailed understanding of what the carve outs are for your specific provider. Oftentimes, acts of war and certain, where there's negligence and other types of activities are not covered by your cyber insurance. And so it's really, as part of that risk mitigation analysis, both understanding where you want to use cyber insurance and making sure that your policy would actually cover the types of events that you are considering as being part of that coverage.
So those are great points. Is that something that you did as far as that analysis? Would you suggest, or have you done with companies in the past, like done that analysis first before going after the coverage, as far as identifying what it is that would be appropriate for your organization, what you already have in place as far as security and privacy controls and programs?
Ideally, yes. Sometimes you don't have that much advance warning. Sometimes in organizations, there's a requirement coming in that you need your cyber insurance for a specific reason. But part of that, you also, at least specifically to the policy side, you will work closely with whether it's your insurance broker or your cyber insurance provider, while you're looking at their policy and what that would cover for your organization. They're also looking at you, your organization, your controls. What risk are you bringing to them for making claims? And what's the probability that you may make a small claim, a large claim? And that's part of their analysis. And that can also be a picture of helping you prioritize improvements. They can give you feedback as they're going through this due diligence on their side. What are some things from their perspective and from their learnings that they have with all of their other clients, the things that you can change, implement, or expand in your security program that can lessen your probability? And oftentimes that results in a decrease in your insurance premiums as well. So that's where, having a relationship with your insurance provider and just having that open conversation. What are you seeing in other organizations that we should be doing or we should be considering here? And then also, some of the larger insurance providers have programs where they have discounts on certain solutions and tools that, if you have them, they can help bring down your insurance provider. Similar to, I know in my homeowner's insurance, if I have a security system and active alarm monitoring, I get a discount on my homeowner's insurance policy. And some cyber insurance providers have similar things in place for specific tools and solutions that they have already evaluated and approved.
Absolutely good analogy with homeowners insurance. We deal with insurance on everything, right? I mean, essentially, it is the same concept, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of organizations have the mindset too that, oh, I don't need to implement MFA, or I don't need to have continuous monitoring that extensive for whatever reason, because I have cyber liability insurance. They'll take care of everything. But at the same time, if you go to them and you say, oh yeah, I don't have MFA, or I don't have any, log correlation, or I'm not doing any monitoring, it's likely that they're not going to cover you, right? So,
Yes.
are there any like low hanging fruit, so to speak, that you've come across that you would suggest that organizations do focus on in order to support everything you just said as far as reducing the coverage costs?
Absolutely. You mentioned MFA, and that would be my number one recommendation. Have multi-factor authentication everywhere. Use kind of phish resistant or the device plus user authentication type of MFA, so it's much more robust. Having that in place everywhere stops a number of the common threat vectors that are happening today. And then secondly, it's back to focusing on the fundamentals. Make sure you are changing default configurations, changing default passwords, keeping up with patches and your overall upgrades within your tech environments. And those two things alone will have a significant positive impact on the security posture of your organization, which in turn will help with your cyber insurance coverage.
Absolutely. Going back to those good old fundamentals, right?
The boring stuff,
The boring
boring but
stuff,
important.
boring stuff. Not talking about cutting edge stuff. Just the boring. Just have firewalls, segment your network, right? Have
Mhm.
multiple. I feel like we need a T-shirt. What is MFA? What is MFA really? So talking about that for a moment too, and kind of switching gears as far as changing the culture. And we probably can both agree that you could have $1 million Splunk implementation, but if it's not configured correctly, it's not ingesting the appropriate logs and has rules and all those things, it's not going to do you any good. Same thing with the culture within your organization. If people are bypassing, if they can, VPN or just doing things out of convenience instead of understanding the real security impacts and implications of not just their work but the organization as a whole. How important would you say changing the culture within organizations and having that transparency and really that understanding and education is when it comes to, how does that tie into like overall reducing your cybersecurity liability premium, making sure that you're using the coverage appropriately and, identifying when it is supposed to be used?
Yeah, and security culture is certainly very important in today's world where almost every employee in some way can be a target for as an entry point into your organization. And while it's not maybe something that's specifically evaluated on your cyber insurance policy, they'll look at your awareness programs and things like that. But having a strong security culture helps decrease the probability and the numbers and the types and the impacts that events may have. So over time, it also just decreases your overall risk and then in turn your cybersecurity premiums. And the way I look at it is everyone, or in my experience, pretty much everyone, they want their company to be successful. They want to be successful in their roles. They want the companies they work for to be successful. And it's helping folks understand what their role in from a security perspective in helping make that happen. And that's where transparency comes into me. It's you could do your awareness training, don't in your fish testing, don't click on these things and pay attention to this. But what I find is that doesn't tell the complete story for folks. And the transparency is kind of, well, what happens next? What happens if I click on this? And what could happen to the organization? And getting to that why and really helping explain and being very transparent on the why helps bring broader awareness, not just education, but recognition that, hey, I could do something completely inadvertently that would have a significant impact on my organization. I better pay a little bit more attention or make sure I'm asking if I see something that looks a little suspicious.
Completely agree there. No shade to the annual security awareness training that we all do. Some could say it is a checkbox, right? It certainly is a requirement from your cyber liability insurance provider, but changing the culture is hard. Like you said, just the awareness is not just about a training, but awareness like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, maybe I shouldn't click on this. And again, oldie but goodie, phishing all day. We all know what phishing is, but do we really know what phishing is from an end user? Do we really know? And that's something is near and dear to my heart. And I do that with the city too. Like I actually have my team explain, okay, you click on that link. Right, we have tools in place that from an automation perspective, sure, to help combat the risk of it actually being affecting our network and so forth. But these are all the steps that an individual has to do because you clicked on that link.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a really good point. It's not just about training; it's like awareness. Um, and sometimes, do you ever like pull that card, like, "Hey, this is a requirement for our insurance," kind of thing, when you're talking about just best practices and awareness and training?
I don't. And I really try to avoid that even from, we need to do this for compliance type activities. I find that it may get short term buy in, but longer term, just as the world evolves and threats change, if folks understand the why, I find them to be much more adaptable and can self-adapt more than just, oh, I have to do this task because it's this requirement. And then it just becomes very much a specific task-oriented approach versus a deeper understanding of why they need to pay attention, what the impacts are, and then they're able to self-teach going forward.
Yeah, I have to agree with you there too. The C word compliance could that might not be a good motivator sometimes. They're like, oh, then it's really like a checkbox, right? Compliance doesn't equal security. So I think that's a great way to look at it. Let's go back to relationships. You touched on it as far as working with your broker or your insurance provider, whatever that relationship looks like for your coverage. How important is having that relationship, and what are some tips that you would give to our audience as far as building that and nurturing that relationship throughout your coverage?
Yeah, it's something that you definitely want to have the relationships in place before there's an event. You may have a cyber insurance policy, but understanding from your provider what's the way to engage them if there is an event. What will they be looking for? What questions will they be asking? What information would they need? What would their process be? And just through that process, helping build that personal relationship and connections. So you're more comfortable when an event happens and you need to engage them. But also through those conversations, you'll continue to get additional insights on what, in this case, a cyber insurance provider is concerned about. And that can also be inputs into other changes or other implementations you may want to make in your program over time.
So would you suggest having like an ongoing conversation with them, or just like maybe once a year, once a quarter? Because I'm assuming some form of attestation, right? That the insurance, that's what we do, but I'm not sure if it differs. But you're attesting to at least once a year, attesting to what controls you have in place. You're working with them throughout the year at least to report any incidents or potential incidents or breaches for sure, whether you use the coverage or not. So, we don't want to your point, we don't want to meet our neighbor when our house is burning down. So, in your experience or when working with colleagues, the conversations that you have with these folks is do you talk to them throughout the year as far as, hey, this is what we're doing, or this is what we were thinking about implementing, how would that impact our coverage or premium, or if we change services or maybe new audience, new data? Like, what are some of the conversations that you've had or you would suggest as far as continuing to cultivate that relationship throughout the year, not just as events occur that you have to report?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's definitely the at least once a year with renewal reattestation of your control environment. But I would also try to talk to them at least one other time during the year at the midpoint, just to understand and check in. What are you seeing? What types of claims are you seeing? What controls are you seeing in organizations that are effective? To start to give you some insight into things you may want to look at and adjust or implement in your organization. And then often I also like the idea of bringing your cyber insurance provider into your tabletop exercises. Oftentimes you can, not just having an internal exercise, but bring in your external counsel, bring in the FBI, bring in your cyber insurance provider. So together you can work through and really understand the processes and the engagements and help identify before there's an event, maybe some gaps that you have or some misunderstandings on who does what in the middle of an event.
Great point. Sometimes those tabletop exercises, whether they're conceptual or actual failovers or somewhere in between, are so invaluable. We talked about that with various guests on the show. Yeah, I completely agree and recommend having, if not the actual cyber broker or provider. I know, like with the city, we have a risk services department that handles all that. So they're like our first line, as well as contacting the actual coverage provider. Um, uh, you also mentioned about there's a possibility that maybe in these same conversations, some of the services that the insurance provider is available to their customers, or maybe some vendors that they would, if you're using, an Okta, for instance, or, Semperis or something, that they're like, oh, well, since you're using that vendor, you have that tool implemented, we know them, we trust them, we have a partnership with them. I don't know if that's always, appropriate or even, a possibility, depending on the business's, audience size and all that. But I feel like sometimes you have to probe those questions with these providers to get that information. Do you have any suggestions or thoughts on your experience about how you can get that very clear response and like pathway? Is it during these conversations you ask those questions if there's any, particular, pathway or vendor that they would that would be considered something that, yeah, absolutely, you're using that, we can reduce your coverage, show us the proof or whatever. Have you come across that when speaking with these folks?
Yeah, certainly there's some brokers that have formalized programs, and they'll talk to you about it. Always ask, do you have any premium reduction programs or, recommended solutions? And it may not be just a specific technical company solution, but a solution overall. MFA is a really good example. That's, as mentioned before, there's the number one recommendation that insurance providers doing their underwriting analysis will tell you as well. And it's all about asking questions. And it normally comes up naturally when you're specifically asking, what can my organization do to reduce our premiums? And you can get a pretty good list of different things to evaluate and consider with whatever programs that provider may have in place. Usually gets presented in response to that question.
Love it, love it. So yeah, we talked quite a bit about. I think relationship is probably the most important. So taking the time to cultivate that, but also, from a risk mitigation or just risk management period, like understanding, reading the fine print within your coverage. So again, I come from the government, so it's a lot of times we're told which broker or I'm sorry, which provider to use, or I know like the state of PA has a statewide contract with a particular cyber liability insurance provider. So sometimes, organizations might not have the choice, I guess you could say, about who they're going with. But do you have any additional maybe suggestions for the listeners who are on the market? It's they're doing their own due diligence. Like as far as the questions, would it be those type of questions? Like, do you have any existing relationships with some tools or vendors? Do you have a plan that you could provide to us or a checklist that would be more in depth than just say have multi-factor, have a SIM, have your policies and procedures. Like, what are some areas that we can share with the audience that are looking for insurance, cyber liability insurance broker that maybe that they want to do their due diligence when making that selection?
Absolutely. Many of the cyber insurance providers use the NIST cybersecurity framework as their approach to benchmark and looking at the maturity for an organization. So one, organizations understanding how their organization lines up against that framework helps you going into the discussions and conversations. But asking cyber insurance providers, certainly what can you do to decrease your premiums? But asking them, what is not covered in my policy? What are some things that I should be considering that I haven't brought up or I haven't discussed? And oftentimes you'll get some insight into maybe what other clients of theirs have run into in various events. And then also asking questions, just what types of events are you seeing with other clients? And that also gives you some insight into what's happening more globally that you may not have direct insight into. So I look at those conversations really as a learning opportunity and just to really understand what they are seeing. And they can also talk a little bit about monetary impact and what is the true impact of an event from what they're seeing and costs and things like that. Oftentimes, in their more formal relationships, they have pre-negotiated rates with certain providers. So if you have providers, whether that's external counsel, incident response investigators that you want to use, another question is to ask who's on the approved provider list. And if the folks that you want to use are not there, also working with your cyber insurance provider to get them added to the list in whatever process they have for going through that.
Yeah, you said that a couple times now, just asking them, what are you seeing? What are you seeing from your other clients? I mean, obviously, as cyber professionals, we have our ears to the ground, what's going on, the landscape, certainly within our organization or our sector, our organizational sector, or industry rather, but also globally. So I love that. Um, you got me thinking there should be some kind of group where, it's all the brokers together or all the providers together that just opens and share like some kind of ISAC or something that shares all this information specifically from their point of view, like what they're paying out or what is being reported. Because certainly you could have an incident or a breach and maybe you don't use that. Maybe you don't
Mm-hmm.
use your cyber liability insurance. I mean, it all depends on how much your coverage is and how much your deductible would be, right? Maybe organizations opt to not even use it, but we still need to be in contact with them, right? We still need to report on it. And I think that sometimes people don't think about it like that. Just because you have the insurance doesn't mean you use it,
Yep,
right?
exactly.
And I've seen that from organizations as well. They have it, but they don't use it because as far as it was a risk based decision, right? They decided
Mm-hmm.
that it wasn't worth it to use the insurance, and sometimes I've talked to colleagues where they used their cyber liability insurance and then were dropped after they used it.
Mm-hmm.
And then, kind of like after you get in so many accidents with your car insurance, they're like, yeah,
Exactly.
sorry, then you got to go to the general, no shade to the general, but then you're on the chopping block again to find another provider, and who knows what that's going to look like. So I think there's a lot of different ways that companies um, uh, could use their liability insurance as well as acquire it when they're out there looking for it. Um, this is great information. I think you mentioned just risk mitigation period. I really love what you said early on about doing an analysis. Maybe you don't have a whole lot of time to do that prior to getting the coverage, but it sounds like you can at least do some kind of analysis, and you should know which organization, as far as services, clients, whether what's critical or not, the type of data you're processing, any interconnections, right? So you should have some idea when you're going to the table procuring or renewing, like, hey, these are the type of potential reasons why we would engage and need your support outside of ransomware. Things like that. Obviously, those are universal, but I really like that. Approaching it from that type of risk mitigation, risk analysis perspective, specifically for cyber liability insurance. It sounds like that's been pretty helpful for you.
Absolutely. It's looking at cyber insurance as just one tool in your overall risk management and security program, risk management program. There's no one thing that can help you solve it all. So having a
No.
large tool set is fantastic.
No, I thought there was one tool for everything, Mandy. That's what you told me on Wednesday. You said everything's
I know.
fantastic. We just, yes.
I wish there was. That
I
would be
wish there
nice.
was. That's why job security, right? We always have
Exactly.
something to talk about. We always have something to do. There's always ways to improve, and I didn't drop the AI bomb, but that's going to be interesting how we can use AI to further reduce our premiums, using those tools, and what kind of relationships these cyber liability providers and brokers are having or understand, really. I mean, do they really understand the risks associated with using AI as a tool? Because it's a tool too, right? The risk associated and the benefits too. So I'm interested in seeing how that's weaved into their checklists, right, and their
Hmm.
the services that they're providing to their clients, and looking at how that can help to reduce the risk. I think we all agree
Yeah.
nobody wants to pay out. We don't want them to pay us. We don't want to have to pay out, right? That's not a good thing when we need to have our insurance involved. So, wow, well, great talk. I mean, we're coming towards the end. I told you to be short and sweet. We covered a lot of gems here. I think my best one, my favorite one, is really doing that risk analysis, focused on your insurance, what type of insurance you need. Building those relationships, not just when you need them or even once a year. and asking questions about what services that they might have to support like tabletop exercises, right? Or maybe a CSF, not an official audit, but maybe some kind of pre-audit or something like that. And what are they seeing so that that communication is open there. Relationships are just huge, period. I'm sure you can agree within our industry. We're building
Absolutely.
them now. We're building them now. So you're on a bunch of boards. I see your SME all over the place. So sounds like you're in tune with what's going on as far as, within cybersecurity as a profession and the landscape as well. Um, how about you tell everybody, Mandy, where can they find you?
Best place to find me is on LinkedIn. Mandy Andress is what I'm listed under. Messages, connection requests, that's the best way to get in touch. And I keep a close watch on it. So look forward to staying in touch with folks.
Yeah, and we appreciate it. I know that you do a lot of speaking, public speaking podcasts and panels and stuff like that. So if anybody's interested in hearing a little bit more about the great work Mandy's doing at risk management and as a CISO, you were the top 100 CISO. Was that last year?
Yes, it was last
Yes.
year.
Congratulations. That's really awesome too. I love to see
Thank
that.
you.
Yeah. So I have a question I like to ask all of my guests to keep it a little light and give back and maybe motivate somebody else to be great. So tell us, Mandy, what advice would you give 18-year-old Mandy right now if you could?
18-year-old Mandy. It's a great question. I would tell her that the future, let's just say, things are constantly changing, and focusing on being adaptable and resilient and comfortable taking on new challenges. And if I kind of reflect on today's world, what I do day to day and what I focus on, I was kind of going into and entering the workforce with that mindset would just help anyone in today's world be successful, I feel.
For sure. And you've been around a while, so you've seen a lot of changes in our field, whether it's from a diversity perspective or just what it is that we're combating in our industry. I saw you worked for TiVo. I don't know who even knows what TiVo is. That was so long ago. I had one, so when I
I
saw that, I
loved
was
my
like, "Oh my
TiVo.
goodness, TiVo!" That was the bomb back in the day. I remember. I was super tough. Like, oh, I have a TiVo. Yeah, I'm recording Days of Our Lives, when I'm in school
Exactly.
or whatever. That was a long time ago. Some might say it was a little easier back then, but I think it's probably the same level of complexity. Just we're dealing with different things, right? Different tech, different adversaries. So thank you for all you've done in the community, cyberspace so far, and really happy that you were able to find time to join us today. Thank you so much, Mandy.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. All right, everybody. We will see you next month for another episode. Thanks for joining us. Take care. See you soon. Thank you for tuning in for this month's episode of the CISO Stories podcast. We want to say a special thank you to this month's sponsor, Sophos. Visit CISOstoriesPodcast.com/Sophos to learn more. Please subscribe to the CISO Stories podcast and you will receive a new episode on the second Monday of each month.